Put that down. The shout came so suddenly that the girl froze. Her small fingers tightened around the bread she had just taken from the kitchen table. Grace stormed toward her like a thundercloud ready to burst. "Did your father buy that bread?" she snapped. The girl slowly shook her head. Grace snatched the bread from her hand and threw it back onto the table. "Then what gave you the courage to touch it?" The girl lowered her eyes and said nothing. Her name was Amara. And in that house, Amara had learned something very early in life. Silence was safer than speaking. Grace pointed angrily toward the door. "If I ever see your hand inside this kitchen without asking me again, I will send you to go live with your poor father in the slums. Do you hear me?" Amara nodded quietly. From the sitting room, another girl burst into laughter. "Mom, look at her face," she said, giggling. "She looks like she wants to cry." Grace turned toward the other girl immediately, her voice softening. "Vanessa, my darling, come here." Vanessa walked proudly toward her mother and wrapped her arms around her waist. Grace smiled warmly and stroked her hair. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Vanessa nodded. Grace opened the fridge and brought out a plate of fried chicken. "Take this to your room," she said lovingly. Vanessa walked past Amara slowly, chewing a piece of chicken and smiling proudly. Amara remained standing quietly beside the table, watching, hungry, but used to it, 'cause this was not new. This had been her life for many years. But the story of how things became this way started long before these two girls were born. Let me take you back to where everything truly began. Many years earlier, Grace was the most admired girl in the university. Her beauty was the kind that made people stop walking. She did not need to try too hard. Her skin was smooth. Her smile was calm. Her voice was soft. But behind that gentle appearance was a very sharp mind. Grace had one belief about life. If a man could not provide comfort, then he had no place in her life. She loved money, nice clothes, expensive perfumes, luxury, and she made sure every man who came close to her understood that. Grace changed boyfriends easily. If one man stopped spending money, she moved to another. Love never mattered. Comfort did. One afternoon, while leaving a lecture hall, Grace walked past a small electronics repair shop near the university gate. The owner of the shop was a quiet young man named Daniel. Daniel had been watching Grace for months. Every day she passed his shop. Every day his heart beat faster. Finally, one evening he gathered courage. As Grace came to buy airtime from his shop, Daniel cleared his throat nervously. "Grace," he said softly. She looked at him. "Yes." Daniel swallowed. "I have wanted to tell you something for a long time." Grace raised an eyebrow with mild curiosity. "What is it?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I like you." Grace did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied him carefully. Daniel was not handsome. His clothes were simple. His shop was small. But she noticed something important. He looked sincere. And sincerity often meant easy control. Grace smiled gently. "I will think about it," she said. 2 days later, she returned to his shop. Daniel's heart nearly jumped out of his chest when he saw her. "I thought about what you said," Grace told him. Daniel waited anxiously. "And?" Grace smiled again. "Okay." Daniel could hardly believe it. From that moment, he treated Grace like the most important person in his life. He gave her money whenever she needed it. Sometimes he gave her free phone accessories. Other times he sent her money for food. Grace accepted everything happily. But in her heart, she never loved him. To her, Daniel was simply useful. Then one day, everything changed. Grace discovered she was pregnant. And that was when the real story began. Grace sat on the edge of her bed that evening, staring at the small white pregnancy test in her hand. 2 red lines. Clear. Unmistakable. She felt anger rising inside her chest. This was not the plan, she muttered to herself. Grace had always been careful. She never wanted to tie herself to any man, especially not someone like Daniel. Daniel was kind, yes. But kindness did not pay for luxury. Kindness did not buy expensive clothes. Kindness did not provide the kind of life she dreamed about. Grace grabbed her handbag and stormed out of the room. 10 minutes later, she was standing inside Daniel's small electronics shop. Daniel was repairing a phone when he saw her. His face lit up immediately. "Grace, I was just thinking about you." But Grace did not smile. Her face was hard, serious. Daniel sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked carefully. Grace folded her arms. "I'm pregnant." For a moment Daniel froze. The screwdriver slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor. "Pregnant?" he repeated slowly. Grace nodded impatiently. "Yes." Daniel's shock lasted only a few seconds. Then something surprising happened. A smile slowly appeared on his face. He stood up. "Grace, that's wonderful news." Grace stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "Wonderful." Daniel nodded excitedly. "Yes, we are going to have a child." Grace's expression darkened. "I'm removing it." The smile disappeared instantly from Daniel's face. "What?" "I said I'm removing the pregnancy." Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, Grace, please don't do that." Grace rolled her eyes. Daniel listened carefully. "I did not plan this." Daniel moved closer to her. "Please keep the baby," he begged. "I promise I will take care of you and the child." Grace laughed bitterly. "With what money?" Daniel looked around his small shop. "This shop is doing okay. I will work harder." Grace studied him quietly. Daniel's eyes were full of hope. He truly believed what he was saying. And that gave Grace an idea. After several days of Daniel begging and apologizing, Grace finally agreed to keep the baby. But from that moment, everything changed. Grace began demanding more. Every day she visited Daniel's shop. And every day she took things. Food, drinks, groceries, snacks. Sometimes she did not even ask. She simply picked whatever she wanted and walked away. First, Daniel did not complain. He believed he was taking care of his pregnant girlfriend. But Grace's lifestyle grew bigger. Her room was always full of food, even things she did not need. Sometimes she shared the groceries with friends. Other times she threw small parties. People praised her generosity. But nobody knew the truth. Everything she was giving away came from Daniel's small shop. Slowly, the shelves in the shop began to look empty. Goods finished faster than money came in. Daniel started borrowing small amounts from friends to refill the shop. He worked longer hours, slept less. But Grace never noticed. Or maybe, she simply did not care. One evening, Daniel finally gathered the courage to speak. "Grace," he said gently, "things are becoming difficult." Grace looked up from her phone. "What do you mean?" Daniel rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "The shop is not doing well lately." Grace frowned. "So?" Daniel hesitated. "I think we need to reduce spending a little so the business can survive." Grace's eyes suddenly flashed with anger. "Reduce spending." Daniel quickly tried to explain. "I'm not saying you shouldn't take things. I'm just saying maybe we can manage things carefully for a while." Grace stood up immediately. "Daniel, let me remind you of something." Her voice became cold. "I never asked to get pregnant." Daniel's heart began beating faster. "You begged me to keep this child." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, but..." "You promised to take care of me," Grace interrupted sharply. Daniel swallowed. "Yes." Grace folded her arms. "And now you're complaining." Daniel panicked. No, Grace. That's not what I meant." Grace looked at him with a dangerous expression. "If this pregnancy is becoming a burden for you, just tell me." Daniel's stomach dropped. "I will remove it tomorrow." Daniel's face turned pale instantly. "No. Please, Grace. Don't do that." He held her hands desperately. "I'm sorry. I will find a way." Grace slowly removed her hands from his. "Good." She picked up a bag of groceries from the shelf and walked away without another word. Daniel stood there silently. watching the door close. He felt something deep inside his chest. Fear. But it was too late. Months passed. Grace finally gave birth to a baby girl. Daniel cried the first time he held the baby in his arms. "She is beautiful," he whispered. Grace looked at the baby without much emotion. They named her Amara. Grace organized a big welcoming party. Food. Decorations. Everything had to look perfect. Daniel borrowed money from a bank to sponsor the celebration. He wanted Grace to be happy. But after the party ended, reality returned. 2 months later, Daniel's shop finally collapsed. The shelves were empty. The debts were too many. He had nothing left to borrow. The business he had built for years was gone. And from that moment, Grace's love for Daniel disappeared completely. But the person who would suffer the most from her anger was not Daniel. It was the little baby girl lying quietly in the cradle. Because in Grace's heart, Amara represented the mistake that destroyed her comfortable life. And from that day forward, Grace began to hate her own daughter. After Daniel's repair shop collapsed, life changed completely. The little comfort Grace once enjoyed disappeared overnight. Daniel began taking any job he could find just to survive. Some days he carried blocks at construction sites. Other days he helped traders load goods in the market. Sometimes he washed cars by the roadside. Whatever work he found, he did it. Every evening he returned home tired, dusty, and exhausted. But Grace never cared. To her, Daniel had become the symbol of failure. "What kind of life is this?" she complained constantly. "I should never have wasted my time with a poor man." Daniel said nothing. All he cared about was his daughter, little Amara. Whenever Amara cried, Daniel carried her. Whenever she was hungry, Daniel fed her. Whenever she was sick, Daniel stayed awake all night beside her. He loved the child deeply. But Grace never showed the same affection. To her, Amara was simply a reminder of a mistake. Then one afternoon something unexpected happened. Grace met a wealthy businessman named Victor at a shopping mall. Victor was confident, generous, and extremely rich. He liked Grace immediately. And Grace saw opportunity again. Soon Victor began sending her money, buying her expensive clothes, taking her to luxurious restaurants. Grace's lifestyle changed overnight. Within months she became pregnant again. But this time the child was not Daniel's. Victor was delighted when he heard the news. He rented a larger apartment for Grace in a better neighborhood. From that moment, Grace's attention shifted completely. Daniel and Amara became almost invisible to her. When the baby was born, it was another girl. Victor named her Vanessa. The welcoming ceremony for Vanessa was grand. Expensive decorations. Plenty of food. Music. Grace moved around the house proudly, greeting people like a queen. Daniel came quietly that evening. He carried Amara in his arms. He stood at the gate for a moment, watching the celebration inside. Then he turned and walked away. He stayed outside with Amara until the party ended. Because deep inside his heart, he knew they did not belong there. Years passed. The two girls grew up in the same house. But their lives were completely different. Vanessa became the princess. Amara became the servant. Vanessa attended a private school with neat uniforms and expensive books. Amara attended a crowded government school with worn notebooks and old shoes. Vanessa spent weekends shopping with her mother. Amara spent weekends washing clothes and cleaning the house. Whenever Amara complained, Grace had only one answer. "Poor man's child has no right to complain." Daniel noticed everything. He hated the way his daughter was treated. But his financial situation gave him little power. Every small money he earned from his odd jobs, he used it to buy something small for Amara. Sometimes biscuits, sometimes a simple dress. Grace mocked him every time. "Look at what poor fathers give their children," she laughed. Daniel swallowed the insults quietly. But Amara understood. She saw the sacrifices her father made for her. And that knowledge shaped the person she would become. Amara grew into a calm and hardworking young woman. She avoided trouble, focused on her studies, and carried one dream in her heart. One day she would make her father proud. Vanessa grew up very differently. She loved expensive things, parties, attention, and the lifestyle her wealthy father provided. When both girls finished secondary school, they entered the university. Grace rented a small apartment for them. But the arrangement was simple. Amara would still cook, clean, and wash Vanessa's clothes. Even in the university, Amara accepted it silently. But her focus remained the same: her studies. 4 years later, the results were released. Amara graduated with first-class honors. Soon after, she secured a job in a large technology company. Her salary was good. The first thing Amara did when she received her salary was something unexpected. She rented a small, comfortable house for her father, and used some money to help him open a new electronics repair shop. Daniel cried when he saw the shop. "My daughter," he whispered. Amara hugged him gently. "This is only the beginning." Months later, something surprising happened. The CEO's son of the company, Adrian, returned from abroad. The first time Adrian saw Amara in the office, he noticed her immediately, not because of beauty alone, but because of her calm nature, her humility, her intelligence. They began talking. Soon they started dating. But Amara remembered something important. Twice in the past, wealthy men had shown interest in her. Both times Grace tried to push them toward Vanessa instead. Amara decided not to repeat that mistake. When Adrian proposed marriage, she accepted. But she asked him to do something unusual. "Please come to my family house as a simple man." Adrian was confused, but he agreed. The day Adrian visited Grace's house for the traditional introduction, he dressed very simply. No expensive car, no signs of wealth. Grace looked at him and laughed loudly. "Like father, like daughter," she mocked. "What kind of poor man did you bring home?" Amara said nothing. The traditional ceremony was simple. Grace showed no interest. But 2 months later, everything changed. Victor, Vanessa's wealthy father, was suddenly arrested for fraud. The news spread across the country. His companies were shut down, his assets seized. And after the trial, Victor was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Grace's comfortable life collapsed instantly. There was no more money, no more luxury. Vanessa's lifestyle ended overnight. 2 months later, it was time for Amara's church wedding. The hall was huge. The decorations were elegant. The guests were important people. Grace and Vanessa arrived looking confused. They thought they had come to the wrong wedding. But when they saw Amara standing beside the groom, their shock deepened. Then Grace overheard something. 2 guests were talking. "That groom is Adrian, the CEO's son." Grace's heart nearly stopped. Later that evening, she pulled Amara aside. Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything. For the insults. For the way I treated you." Amara listened quietly. Then she spoke softly. "I forgive you." Grace's eyes filled with tears. But Amara continued. "You are my mother. I cannot hate you. But some wounds take time to heal." He paused, then added gently, "I'm leaving the country with my husband. And with my father." Grace stood frozen. Because the daughter she had once called useless had become the one who saved the man she once despised. And the princess she once adored now had nothing left. Life had turned completely. And for the first time in many years, Grace finally understood something important. Wealth can disappear. Beauty can fade. But kindness and patience always find their reward in the end.